Oh, when you are. Oh, something going overhead. Do you know what that looks like? That looks like an MD-11. Just from the vapor trail I can see there. Should we have a little look? See if we grab it. That's a good start, isn't it? Got nothing, no. See how right or wrong I am, or is it 767 or something? Triple. Saudi triple, right, okay. Dammam to Washington, yeah? It's a quite a popular I'd say destination, but quite in Dammam has been quite a lot in the just read this morning. Morning, folks. How you doing? Day 46. Valentino Rossi Day. There we go. It is the famous 46 day. Interesting to see a post from a first officer with British Airways on Boeing 777 this morning. 11th crew flew out to China to pick up 24 tons of PPE. 24 tons. Now, in general terms, that doesn't seem like a lot because the 777 is capable of carrying somewhere in the region of 97 tons or something like that of freight in the 200 configuration, in cargo configuration. Not sure what the cargo freight capacity is of the belly freight of a 777. I think it might, I don't know whether he was flying a 200 or 300, but anyway, basically, the belly was full, and also they're utilising the seats as well, as we've talked about, using the seats themselves, strapping them into the seats, and obviously strapping them down then as well. Just cardboard boxes, folks. I mean, to be honest with you, it's crazy that the cardboard box itself, full of PPE masks, it probably weighs more than the masks themselves, because they're obviously extremely lightweight. But 24 tons is... That's an incredible, it's millions and millions and millions of face masks. So fantastic job by British Airways, and of course Virgin Atlantic as well, doing exactly the same thing. And of course our friends at Cargo Logic, as well as Volga Dneper, Cargolux, Omni Air, Aerologic, all of those folks doing a tremendous job. Even Logan Air, it has to be said, Logan Air converting one of their aircraft to be able to take a passenger on board with a ventilator, so like as an air ambulance. So even those guys with the Saabs getting involved right the way from the big jets down to the small turboprops. So what have we got today? We're going to be continuing on with our VE celebrations just for a couple of hours here, folks, today, because obviously this was Liberation Day in a lot of places, specifically out there in Jersey and Guernsey, which were occupied by the Germans. Of course, it was a much more sort of like relaxed occupation, it has to be said, for the Germans, because they didn't know what to do. All they were there for was to protect the island from actually any invasion by the British. But at the end of the day, there were actually more friendships made and things like that than there were than sort of like, you know, enemies, so to speak. And of course, I think the Germans were very happy to be liberated, to leave the islands at the end of the war after VE Day. An interesting story I heard once, and I've said this on here before, but and I'm sure that a few people have heard this before, but a group of prisoners of war, it might have been in Hastings or somewhere like that, because you know down in those places with the big roundabouts, they've got like the flower beds on them, and around about this time of year, when with liberation, was when the bulbs were coming out and all that. And the Germans had been commissioned to basically plant all the bulbs for the lovely floral celebrations as spring came around in the UK, and so they out they went and they did all of this stuff and planted all of these bulbs. Obviously, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek laugh that they had amongst each other, because when the flowers eventually came out, I can't use the word, but "fu" basically was the words that they spelled out in the flowers, which is quite funny, man. I mean, when it came out, they must have thought, fair play to you guys for doing that. So a little bit of banter with the Germans there. But anyway, indeed, this was Liberation Day, so a lot of people very, very happy. Unfortunately, we won't have a Liberation Day from coronavirus CV19 because it's going to be a very, very slow process. It's not like all of a sudden one day we're at war, the next day we're not. We can all run outside and celebrate in the streets. Of course, bunting and street parties and all that kind of stuff would normally be going on at this time of year. Right today, yesterday I did see some people gathering in a street near me, social distancing, it has to be said. So, you know, obviously if people are sensible, that's what it's all about, being sensible and having common sense, isn't it? You know, all I've got, nothing glamorous at all. All I'm going to be doing today is waterproofing the top of the roof of my shed. Which isn't very glamorous, but it's to stop Charchie from falling through it, because he's a fat... No, he's not fat. He's not fat. He's just big boned, okay? It's just a big cat. He's big boned. He's big boned. But anyway, so where are we going today then, folks? A few of you members and viewers may have already seen this, but these are sort of like snippety pieces. We're going to put the full walkthrough, and this is the edited piece with Just Jane, Lancaster bomber. From up there at the Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre at East Kirkby, a former World War II bomber base, bomber station, and a live museum, as we like to call it, an active one. It's just a fantastic place to visit, folks. If you ever get the opportunity to go there, even late on in the summer, I'm sure that the folks up there are going to do their best to at least get a couple of taxi runs in before the end of the year. Don't forget, we've got right the way through till September, even October. I think they close in November. They do November celebrations, Guy Fawkes night. They do some fireworks up there as well. So I'm sure that we'll see that place open, along with all the other wonderful places that celebrate our time when we were at war. Well, we won't be celebrating our time at war, but just basically reflecting on those days when we were at war. But it is a fantastic place to visit. Of course, it is Lancaster Just Jane. I'll give you a quick rundown of the Lancaster bomber itself. You're going to get a tour through with Spenny and myself through the entire aircraft, starting at the rear turret, going into the aircraft and walking right the way through the entire fuselage up to the cockpit. Then we're going to do we did a live start-up with the crew there as well. Andrew Panton, the curator of the museum, is one of the taxi pilots as well. What a great job. What do you do? I taxi a Lancaster bomber. Fantastic. And then, of course, we get to see it taxiing as well. Just Jane was built by Austin Motors, get that, at Longbridge near Birmingham. So obviously there were a number of different places where the Lancaster bombers were built, as well as all the componentry coming from all tiny little workshops all over the country. And of course Canada as well built the Lancaster bomber. But this particular one that you're just about to see, Just Jane, was built by Austin Motors at Longbridge. It wasn't named Just Jane, it has to be said, when it was built. It was built and it was delivered in April 1945. So you know, it was basically never went into service. Given the serial number NX611, which she still uses, she was one of the first 150B Mark 7 Avro Lancasters destined as part of the RAF's Tiger Force in the Far East. However, Japan's early surrender meant these aircraft were suddenly surplus to requirements, and instead of seeing service, NX611 ended up in storage at Lando. There she stayed until 1952. From then on, a checkered career followed. In April 52, she was bought by the French government, painted midnight blue. She flew maritime patrol for the French Naval Air arm, which is interesting because you do see some of the maritime equipment on board where it would have normally been for Bomber Command. So that's where there's a little bit of a differential in what you see from a Bomber Command aircraft to this one here with maritime surveillance. 10 years later, she went to Naumau, New Caledonia, was painted white and used for air-sea rescue and cartography. Then in '64, the French presented her to the Historical Aircraft Preservation Society and flew her up to her new place in Sydney, her new home in Sydney, where she was overhauled before being flown back to Britain. Wow! Girl's done some mileage, probably more miles than your average Bomber Command Lancaster. In fact, probably most definitely, I would have thought, other than, of course, the ones that flew from Canada, of course. She was overhauled before being flown back to Britain. It took 9 days to complete the 12,000-mile journey back to her homeland, 70 flying hours, landing at Biggin Hill on the 13th of May 1965. What a sight that must have been. Can you imagine that, folks? You know, 1965, all those people that were still sort of like kind of still had the war fresh in their minds. To see a Lancaster bomber suddenly arriving at Biggin Hill must have been a fantastic day. Temporarily grounded due to expiry of permitted flying hours. It was 1967 before NX611 flew again, but even then public appearances were brief because of prohibitive costs. She was flown to Lavenham in Suffolk, and a few years later in '72 was put up for auction at Squires Gate in Blackpool. Meanwhile, in Lincolnshire, determined to commemorate the death of their brother Christopher, who was killed in the Nuremberg raid in March '44, and all of the men who served in Bomber Command, Fred and Harold Panton had decided to purchase a Second World War bomber. At one time, they had their eyes on a Halifax, which was coming up for sale, but their father told them in no uncertain terms they would not be permitted to keep one at his farm. Interesting. I wonder whatever happened to that Halifax, because there is no Halifax in the UK, especially, other than the one obviously that's at Elvington, which is made up of different sections and different parts of Halifax, Halifax parts that have been brought in from wherever, but not a complete Halifax bomber. So I wonder whatever happened to her. The years passed, but the brothers still held on to their dream. Eventually, Fred and Harold became co-owners of their own farm. When some land came up for sale, which included part of the defunct East Kirkby airfield, they bought it. Some areas of concrete and new buildings still stood on the old airfield in a state of disrepair. This is all stuff that you can read on the website for Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre, folks. In September '83, NX611 was finally purchased by Fred and Harold, and 4 years later, after completing an agreed total of 10 years gate guardian at RAF Scampton, of course the place where the famous 617 Squadron were based, she was brought to East Kirkby courtesy of the RAF. It was 16 years since Fred had seen her at the Blackpool auction, and Dreamliner on its way out. What, out of 09? Yeah. Okay, let's grab that. The only problem with that, of course, will be the fact that it will be. Let's just grab that. She'll come over the top, I'd imagine. Has she rotated, or is she on her way? So this is the Dash 10. You will, and it's a new livery, so you will see the blue engine cowls, folks. Really nice blue, I have to say. Very nice, a nice shade of blue on the engine cowls of the new livery with United Airlines. Shout out also to a gentleman who's a first officer with Swiss A320, was on the quiz last night. Gave him a shout out a couple of times. Hope everybody enjoyed their time. Again, major thanks to the pilots who got involved. There she is. Is it? Yeah, that's all you're going to get, I'm afraid. Just get a little glimpse of the tail livery there. which is quite nice. Okay, well, let's just get this intro over with. Yeah, let's get this intro over with. I'll just. Okay, she's not wrong. Okay. So folks, yeah. So obviously, you know, for anybody who's interested in the heritage history of the Lancaster bomber and Bomber Command in general, this is our little celebration for independence, basically, or should I say, anywhere that was at war was no longer at war. Of course, liberation, and of course, Victory Day in Europe. The first one you're going to see is the walkthrough with Just Jane. Then you're going to have a little snippet. We saw it yesterday, but a very short snippet of the flypast with BOAC 747 and the Red Arrows. That's a little piece. Then we've got the RAF 100 flypast, which was filmed in 2018 on top of a hotel roof in West London, and I can't remember for the life of me the fella who was very kindly. He was actually the general manager, I think, there, and he very kindly gave us access onto the roof there. If you're around, my friend, it would be great to hear from you again, because obviously so many people come and go. They still hang around in the background. We see people like, wow, haven't heard from you for ages, you know, for like a year or something like that, but they're still around, they're still hanging about, and it's great to see everybody getting involved so much. So thank you if you are still there, and thank you for your continued support, of course. But this is the RAF 100 flypast. Some great stuff in there, I have to say. A full Royal Air Force contingent, all the military jets, as well as the transporters, as well as the helicopters as well. Great big contingent of helicopters, and of course followed up by the Red Arrows as well. Then we've got the startup, which we're not going to go through the museum piece. If anybody wants to watch it, they can. They can go to our library and see the Wings Museum down in Sussex. But we're going to go straight to the piece with George Dunn, DFC, 76 Squadron Halifax pilot, who gets the honour of starting up a Merlin 22 engine that was recovered from a crash site of a Halifax bomber out in Germany. 4 engines brought back to Sussex, one of them painstakingly restored and fired up at the Wings Museum. Incredible opportunity to see that. And of course, George Dunn, make sure that you listen out for the little piece that he does to the small crowd that gathered, and then of course at the end a little interview that I do with him, which is sort of like, you know, I had to throw it in there because I had to get the I can hear this one coming out. Oh, there she is. This is another one over the top, and then it's another one over the top. Yeah. It's a tricky one. Air Canada. Very, very hazy. Very, very hazy. You say you got Hercules over the top. Okay, so that's a wonderful piece, folks, with George Dunn, DFC, and thank you again to Cherry, who's the organiser, putting together all of those veterans who do book signings in museums around the UK. And then finally, a walk around Bomber Hall at RAF Hendon Museum in North London. Again, another place that's steeped in history. Unfortunately, for the last 10 years now, the surrounding area around Hendon, RAF Hendon Museum, has been ruined, it has to be said, by high-rise apartment complexes. But they did play their part in moving the white factory over to a new place, painstakingly, brick by brick, taking down the control tower, and moving it over to where the White Museum as well, even incorporating the odd little anomalies in the brickwork as well, so out of all higgledy-piggledy in some places, which is good. It's good to see, because back in those days they just slung stuff up as quick as they could. But that's a good one. Walk around Bomber Hall at the RAF Hendon Museum. So obviously we will keep our eyes on the sky, and for the next couple of hours enjoy this one, folks. This is a celebration, a continued celebration for VE Day, and and out of respect for all our celebrating all of our veterans out there who have fought in the wars all the time, throughout all time as well, modern day warfare as well. We salute you, men and women of the forces. Okay, go for it, Jilly. Run VT. Hello and welcome to Big Jet TV and a very special historic show here at the Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre in East Kirkby. Today we'll be showcasing a classic aircraft, Lancaster NX611 Just Jane. We'll be meeting up with one of the volunteers, Spen, who'll be showing us around the inside of the aircraft, and then we'll be watching her start up those 4 Rolls-Royce engines and following her out on one of her taxi runs. Well, that's all to come, but before all the action starts and they wheel her out of the hangar, I managed to catch up with Curator Andrew Panton, who explains the history of Just Jane and East Kirkby.
I'm Andrew Panton, General Manager of the Aviation Museum here at East Kirkby. I taxi both the Lancaster and the Mosquito. East Kirkby here was originally RAF East Kirkby. It flew with Lancaster Squadrons 57 and 630 Squadrons. So Fred and Harold Panton, Fred's my grandfather. They had a brother flying Halifax bombers during the Second World War with Bomber Command. Unfortunately, he was lost on the Nuremberg raid in March 1944. So they really wanted a lasting memorial to him and to all of Bomber Command. And when the Lancaster came up for sale, they purchased her, purchased the land here at East Kirkby and brought it all together to form the Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre. We have a team of around 8 engineers that work on the aircraft. There's about 3 of them that are volunteers. All the rest are actually paid engineers. So we have a big team actually working towards the restoration of the Lancaster. She's currently in a taxiing condition. We made her taxiing in 1995, so she runs under her own engines with her own brakes. And we've started the scheme of returning her to airworthiness, which is a 10-year plan, and we're currently in year 3. So what we're doing is we're doing 6 months of restoration work where we focus on a rear fuselage section, and then we have 6 months of taxiing to raise the funds to then spend on the restoration work. The Aviation Centre is on a Bomber Command airfield. It is primarily about RAF Bomber Command during World War II. So we've got the Lancaster here, which is live, so it taxis. We also have a Mosquito here, which served with the 100 Group, which is also live and taxiing now. That particular aircraft is owned by Tony Agar. We have various other aircraft under restoration, including Handley Page Hampden. We've got quite a unique collection of World War II RAF vehicles as well, including the only known crew bus, Fordson Watt 1 crew bus. So with it being on an original wartime airfield with original Lancaster, original equipment, it's like stepping back in time as you come back to the museum here. We've got the original control tower set up as it was during wartime, and majority of the buildings here are all original wartime buildings, not necessarily in the original position, but we've brought them here from various neighbouring airfields and sites to really recreate Bomber Airfield as it was. So with the local village of East Kirkby, there's also RAF Coningsby nearby, which is the home to the Battle of Bicester Memorial Flight. There's also Woodhull Spa, which housed 617 Squadron Officers Mess, which was at the Petwood Hotel, which you can also visit and see some of the displays there from Bomber Command as well. You can go to our website, which is linksaviation.co.uk. From there you can book a taxi ride on the Lancaster, you can book a tour, you can just buy tickets to events. We have a lot of air show and reenactment events around through the calendar as well. You could book a winter tour, so you can come and see the restoration work happening. So really all the information is on our website, linksaviation.co.uk.
Okay, so thanks to Andrew for explaining all the history of Just Jane and, of course, this wonderful live museum at East Kirkby. Okay, they've wheeled her out of the hangar and they're going through some final checks at the moment, checking the fluid levels. We'll be getting on to the action in a little while, but before we do that, let's go and meet up with Spen, who's going to take us on a tour around this wonderful aircraft.
Yeah, so we've got the rear turret. You'll notice that we've got two guns on this one. These are 50 cals. If you see a turret with 4 guns on, they are the 303s.
That was a little pea shooter Bolton and Paul, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So this is because this is quite a late aircraft. You've got all the upgraded systems on this one.
Yeah. So a much happier a rear gunner for sure.
Well, he was a bit more devastated when it hit something. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I believe they used to remove the perspex out of the rear turrets as well.
Sometimes, yeah, for him to get a better view.
And of course, very cold conditions as well.
Oh, very cold.
Minus 30 odd.
Oh yes.
These are the guys that wore heated suits, didn't they?
Heated suits, heated gloves. Yes. But even so, it's still cold up there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And the loneliest place on a bomber.
Yeah, tail end Charlie. Sadly, usually the first guy to go when everything kicked off. But strangely enough, he was the one who had the easiest means of exit.
Yes.
Because all he had to do was swivel his turret around 90 degrees, and he could just fall out the back.
And just make sure his chute is within
as long as
reach.
He remembered to pick up his chute on the way past.
Yeah. That's the flare chute, isn't it?
That's the flare chute, yes.
So that would be where they would drop coloured flares.
Coloured flares, yes. Or because when this was used by the French as a maritime aircraft, possibly sonar buoys.
Yes, right. I see. Yes. And they had all kinds of different, for the evening, the raids for the Pathfinders, like Wangui and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know, just
they
all the different
had
names.
a huge. They call them strange names. I mean.
Yes. So as you can appreciate, folks, it's a tight squeeze in here, right, looking down into the rear turret. So we've got the entrance is literally just slide straight down there.
He slides down that pad. Once he's in, he closes 2 little doors behind him, little doors at the side there.
Yes.
And he's in, there for the trip.
Is that an electric operated turret?
No,
It's hydraulic.
That's hydraulic. Yeah, the front and rear turrets on this aircraft are hydraulic. Everything that's on the aircraft now was on the aircraft while it was at Scampton.
A lot of people will be like, why have you got a pigeon?
A pigeon,
in the
yes.
box? It's quite interesting. Sometimes in a ditching situation
Yes.
where they'd send the pigeon,
Yeah,
they're coming across the channel and they've only got a couple of miles to go and they have to ditch it. And,
with their position on it.
and there were actually quite a lot of, I believe, cases where the pigeons actually saved quite a few lives.
Apparently so, yes. There's quite a few pigeons actually, I think, got the Dickie medal.
Yes.
For that kind of thing, yes.
Now this is for the compass, I believe.
It is. This is the. I'll read it off the side here and get it right. It's the repeater reading master unit.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the.
So it's basically.
It's a gyroscopic.
It's a gyroscopic
Yeah.
compass.
Yeah.
I mean, it's falling off.
Yes, of course.
But it's fully gimbaled.
And moving forward,
Moving
so
forward.
that's the H2S
The
cover for the H2S. Is that the actual? Yeah, this is the inspection.
Yes, if we were to take this off, you'd be able to see the radar unit itself, the scanner.
Yes.
It's a Mark II version of the British H2S. So this was actually used as what we call an air-to-surface vessel radar. So they're actually looking for submarine periscopes and that kind of thing.
You can see that the inside of this aircraft is truly authentic. Now this pipe running through here, is this the heating pipe?
This is the heating system, yes.
And that would have been drawn off of one of the
that is drawn from behind the starboard leading edge.
I see. Okay,
Yeah, so
from
you
the
got-
engine,
so you got
heat from the engine.
engines,
Yeah,
that's it,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, so it's just the heat from the engine, not the exhaust, obviously. And these are these flares here?
These are the flares, yes. Although these are dummy ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So different coloured flares, and I would imagine they'd have a very pistol on board as well.
Yeah. So in some circumstances where the one of the crew would fire a particular colour as they're approaching to say that they've got injured personnel on board,
Yeah,
or
yeah, that kind of thing. Yes,
yeah. Okay, so this is obviously the mid-upper turret section. So normally we would have had this would have gone all the way to the ground, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
with a big rotating.
That's right.
Section
Yeah.
where he would sit in it, and there would be a seat in there and everything.
In fact, the turret that goes in here is actually on a maintenance stand in the hangar.
And good for the taxi ride.
You get a lovely view.
Yeah, you get a
Yes,
fantastic
without a
view. So we're now coming up. This is the screw for the flaps, isn't it? I believe.
doubt. This is the hydraulic ram. It's
Okay.
hydraulic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that operates the flaps. So this is coming up from behind the starboard wing, and then feeding off in that direction. Where the Rebecca indicator is on this one,
Yes.
you'll see that's where the H2S indicator is.
Okay.
These items here, and there's two more here, are the voltage regulators from the generators on the engines, and that of course is emergency air. That of course is a fire extinguisher, and you've got you've got the hydraulic tank.
Something that is vulnerable to attack, I have to say.
Yes.
You get a bullet through that, your hydraulics are out. Okay, so this is the radio operator
This is
station.
the radio operator station, yes.
And that's all the original set by the looks of it.
It is. These are original.
Is that the and the trailing aerial? Where would the trailing aerial? Is that the set over there? That one with the switches on it? Is
That one there.
It's just got the knob on the end of it.
It's just a big lock that sticks out.
Yes. Yeah. And that's your and that is the drift indicator, the left and right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the drift indicator.
And more flares, of course. Okay, let's move forward up to the business end. Now I'm definitely going over the spar now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now imagine climbing over that.
Yeah.
You're in full kit.
Yeah.
The captain's bought it, or the aircraft is on fire, and you've got to get out quickly.
Yeah. Okay, so now this is the navigator station.
That's right. So this
This would be the H2S set.
This would be.
Yes.
But in this aircraft, this is the Rebecca.
Yes.
Right, which is the
Okay.
the landing aid.
Other than that, everything else is
Other
pretty
than that, it's fairly
authentic, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
That's his plotting desk.
It is. It's
He'd sit
actually,
there for the full flight.
He would be. He'd have a little seat that swung out from underneath here, and
Yes.
he sat here. So he's got his desk light. He's got his light for the repeater instruments, because he needs to know how fast they're going and what height they're at.
Yes.
Because he's going to be doing all the navigation calculations. He'd be there with his stopwatch.
Yes.
And he'd be saying, right, we're doing sort of 200 knots. Right. So in 10 minutes we need 20 degrees port, 20 degrees starboard or whatever,
Yes.
to go on to the next heading. You can then calculate on here what your drift is, and then you can tell the pilot, and he'll give it just a little bit of rudder.
Flight engineer's panel right here. He's going to be keeping a check on engine temperatures, oil temperatures, I guess.
Yes.
The red ones here, are they fuel cocks?
They're fuel cocks, yes.
Yeah.
What you can do with those is you can actually use them to transfer fuel from one
Yes.
tank to another. So, if you've got a hole in your port number 2,
Yes.
you can transfer it into the starboard number 2.
Yes. Let's just have a little look down into the bomb aimer's position. Obviously, now sometimes I believe that the bomb aimer would double up as the front gunner. Is that right?
correct? Yes, yes.
And of
He
course-
doesn't need to be the bomb aimer all the time, so...
No. He only needs to be the bomb aimer for about 5 minutes.
Yes.
And there's all his equipment down there, and of course the bomb sights and so on and so forth. And that's the computer down there, I believe.
Okay, that square item.
Yes,
That's
yes.
the bombing computer.
Yes.
And if you just... I'll shine my torch on it.
Okay.
That round thing there, that is a Sperry autopilot.
Ah.
It's just to give the pilot a bit of rest on the 12-hour missions.
I see. I see.
So that would give them sort of a continuous heading and continuous height.
Okay, so once again, all authentic front end here in the flight deck.
Yes.
There's his compass over there.
That's the G4B compass. Yes, that's the, if you like, that's the well, yeah, there we go.
Yes.
That's the emergency. So when all else fails,
Yes.
at least he's got a basic compass
Yes.
to get him home. Now that particular style of compass was quite common in RAF aircraft, right up until sort of the mid-60s.
Now, a lot of people may be asking, well, hold on a minute, I've seen Lancasters with 2 pilot seats in them, and again, this is purely authentic. They may be mistaking it perhaps with BBMF's Lancaster, which
Yes.
has to have a 2 pilots
I do believe so, yes.
seat and obviously 2 control columns
Yes,
as well.
yeah.
So is that something that will eventually happen to this aircraft?
We do have the kit to retrofit, if you'll excuse the rhyme. Yeah, we've it's something that is in the pipeline.
Yes.
But at the moment, because you can imagine, it's a bit awkward for people to get down the front on a taxi run.
Yes. Yes.
So
I guess
at
that'll
the
kind
moment,
of block it off once it's
it
in.
would up to a point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right out there are 2 beautiful Merlin engines. Obviously the port side and then starboard side over there. And of course these engines have been fully restored. Right, okay, well, there we go. Thank you, Spen, so much.
You're welcome.
You are now famous and we really appreciate your time. You can go and have your breakfast now.
Lovely job.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Those 2 to number 2 tanks. That's it. Think we're happy for prime, John?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to the fireman.
Okay, right. Radio call 5. Fire 1 is vector X-ray radio check. Right, receiving your landing clearance. Right, John. What we do is while they're priming, switch your starboard number 2 booster pump on. Then you open these. So your number 3 for 5 seconds, shut it. Number 4, 5 seconds, shut it. Yeah. Put that booster pump on, the port one on. And do the same. You can also use that as a functional for the actual booster pump so you can hear them all. Next thing, undercarriage switch up across, so the guard is away and then these tubes come up to there and then the booster pump can go on. Brakes are good, they're at 300 level. Yeah, they need to stay there. You still got a chop your side, John?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Good GP. Audio.
Make sure that's off. Happy, Dave?
Yeah, carry on.
Happy, Liz?
Got the booster pump on.
Yeah, so give Andrew a signal. That's it. Number 3, roll on. Switch it on. Turning 3.
you start number 1, yeah, full scale deflection on the rest, yeah, just press the button.
Okay, so there you go then, folks. What a fantastic example of a working Lancaster bomber these guys have here at East Kirkby. Thanks once again to all the hard-working volunteers and, of course, to the staff here who've laid this on for us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Post office tower right here, one of the original big tall buildings built here in London. So that's commonly seen over London. Watching from Cape Town, good morning to you. So that's how close to Harrods we are, guys. Knightsbridge, heart of London, beautiful architecture. Would love to come to London. Harmick Vascanian, good day to you, my friend. So all these guys sitting out on their roofs. Give us a wave, boys. Here we go, look. Good lads. Here they come. Okay, so this is the first formation of what looks like the choppers. Oh, right, okay. Here we go, guys. Get sharing. And last comment I just saw there was thank you to the RAF from the Royal Canadian Air Force. Of course, the RCAF, who played a huge part in the Second World War over here, specifically with Bomber Command. So here we go, here's the first wave, what looks like choppers. Wow, look at this. Okay. They have trained for many weeks on this, guys. So big shout out to all the crews who worked tirelessly to bring this to us. Should start to hear them. That's a number of Chinooks in there. Hear them now. Here they come. Now they're just over Buckingham Palace right now, so they should be passing overhead. Here we go. I have to come back because here I have the DC3. There's the DC3 right there, guys, and right behind that is the BBMF. The DC3 playing a huge role in the landings. Oh, look at this. BBMF Lancaster flanked by Spitfires and Hurricanes. Gotta say, I've filmed some amazing things for Big Jet TV, but that about Puts the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake. Wow. Here's your trainers. There's another group. Prefects, are they the prefects? C-130s. See a tanker probe at the front of the aircraft there. .400M. Ah, she's beautiful, this one. Look at those beautiful blades, man. More tanker capabilities. BA-146 trading in behind this one. Globemaster trading with a BA-146. Here comes a 330 tanker, I believe. Oh yeah, look at this. High speed, high speed. This is that little RC reconnaissance search and rescue. Beautiful. And right behind him, AWACS. With the radar operational. Normally flying at high altitudes, this one. Wow. It's the Reds. No, it's not. Is it? Looks like it is. Another wave of reds. Out of formation slightly, but these look like the tornadoes. GR4s. Eurofighter. Wow, lightnings. Look at this group. 100, look at that, man. Hey, that's what you call a format. There's your 22 tornadoes. Or typhoons, sorry. Like we missed the just caught the tail end of the colours, guys. Got no director on scene with me today, so I couldn't switch back for that. So it is impressive how they put this together, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic.
Using 90%, I think, of the original engine.
Yeah. It's all stock 1943 configuration, basically.
Apart from the radiator, of course.
Yes.
And the glycol radiator.
Yeah, there's a few modifications.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously the propeller blades on the Halifax would have been wooden originally.
Yes. And longer.
Yeah, and longer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these ones are actually sort of aluminium blades, and they're from a sea fire. So they have to be cut down, obviously, because we don't want it to take too much of a bite into the slipstream.
Yeah,
and ground clearance as well.
What is interesting, and what people will notice when she does fire up, is how quiet she is compared to the normal exhaust, the stubbed exhaust of that we're used to when we were up at Lincolnshire.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, these saxophone exhausts, they were designed primarily for flame suppression when the bombers were operating.
I've heard that,
at night.
I must admit, but then again,
But they do also act as a bit of
well, if
silence.
it's on a Mustang, it must be later engines
It does
as well.
have that kind of
You know,
side advantage.
these
Yes.
But what you've got basically is the exhaust
Yeah.
coming out into these exhaust ports here and collecting in this chamber. It's then sort of having a chance to cool down a little bit before it sort of then gets ejected out through the back part of the exhaust there.
And of course, it is the flame that they're trying to suppress.
Yeah, would you imagine at night time, a bomber operating on pitch black, to any night fighter, those flames coming out,
same layout.
4 rows of exhausts, you know, are going to stand out quite a long way on a clear night.
Yes, especially 8 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they don't need any, disadvantages like that.
Yeah, yeah. But so the carcass of the engine, the casing itself,
Yeah.
is it managed to withstand, or have you Was there extensive repairs done to that, or?
There were some repairs done, some minor sort of cracks and things that have been welded by specialists up in Leeds.
Oh yeah, you needed that.
There's very few people around who can do that kind of work.
Yes.
Luckily he can.
Yes.
So a lot of the work in that respect is done by him.
Yeah.
It's all the original engine casing. The only thing that didn't survive was the engine sump, the oil sump at the bottom.
I see. Yes, of course it would. That would have.
Took the brunt of the
Yeah.
sort of impact.
So where did you manage to source that from?
Well, this one was kindly donated by East Kirkby.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So we're sort of indebted to them for that.
Yes, most definitely. Of course, I guess back in the day, the changing of the seals and so on and so forth on these sumps wouldn't have been a massive of massive importance to the ground crews, which is why we saw so much oil on the dispersals.
Yeah.
It would be more so the componentry, making sure the engines were working.
I think with these kind of engines, if you didn't get a bit of oil leakage, then there was a concern.
Yeah.
More than having a concern that it is leaking.
Yes, yes. And what is interesting, I know we've touched on this earlier, is the framework.
Yeah.
The fact that that's all original.
The original frame from JD 150
Yeah.
in 1943. Pretty unique, really.
Yeah, yeah. All the ignition harness, everything's
That's
all original.
Yeah. Even the prop hub, that's the original
Yeah.
prop hub.
Yes.
So the blades aren't, and the prop hub is.
You're right on the audio, Gilly. Do you want me to switch the mic? Okay, I've switched the mic round here. We can't hear you too well, Kevin.
Okay.
Okay, right. I've switched the mic round now, so you should.
Yeah,
get
well, I was just saying
slightly
that
better audio. Yeah, carry on, sir.
The prop hub's original, the blades are replacements, and as you said earlier, of course they've been sawn down. And originally the Halifax would have had variable pitch propellers. This it would be variable pitch, but it's fixed in one position.
Yes.
Because it's almost fixed in a feathering position. It's taken a small bite, but not too much, because that'll give it the forward thrust, and we don't want that on a
Yes.
static engine.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh no, it's not for me. This chair's not for me.
So. So is the supercharger actually is it actually operational whilst you're firing it up? Is it actually
It's not really at this
not
kind
at
of
maximum operating?
no.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind we have to restrict the RPM on this, because you can't put it up to full RPM, even though it's fairly rigid in the stand.
Yes.
You know, we can't put it to takeoff power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we restrict it to about 2,000 RPM maximum. Most of the time we'll run it a bit less than that.
Yeah. And I can see that we're missing the starter. Is that where the starter would have been there?
That was, I think, the generator.
Oh, the generator,
Yeah.
right. Okay. But you're using the starter, the original starter, are you?
We're using 8 starter, yeah. Yeah.
Most impressive. It is just incredible to think that thing flew, what, 15 missions, was it?
Yeah, yeah. And of course that night in 1943, when it kind of met that ace night fighter.
Yeah. So it may have been, like I was discussing with Dan earlier on, it may have been corkscrewing and
More than likely.
yeah.
That was
So that's
kind
why
of
how they got out of the stream.
all pilots were trained, you know, that was kind of evasive manoeuvre, textbook evasive manoeuvre,
Yeah.
and they almost certainly would have tried that.
Yeah. Could have even gone into a rudder stall, because this was a Mark II Halifax, was it?
It was, yeah. The
So it
Mark
would
II
have-
Halifax is the only one that had the Merlin engine. The other Marks of Halifax
Had the
had Bristol
Bristol
Hercules
Hercules,
radial
yeah.
engines.
Yes. So there's, and of course there were different types of rudder on the Mark II to the Mark III. Mark III had
kind
the
of
D
pointed
type.
leading edge.
Yeah.
I say pointed, it's not drastically pointed.
Yes.
But
It's more
as you say,
triangular than the other one.
The Mark III, for example, had a much straighter
Yes.
vertical rudder.
Yes. and they were susceptible, I believe, to for instance, the HR 796. The word was that it went into a rudder stall.
Yeah.
But that in that instance, the crews were given a chance to get out.
Yeah.
In this instance, there's a good possibility that the aircraft was shot up extensively, and
and they may not even have had much warning.
Yes.
Because they were just developing, I think, the upward firing technique of getting underneath the bombers and firing
music,
upwards. Yeah, that's it.
The ME-110s, wasn't it?
But
great shame.
that was just coming into play when this was shot down. So.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of the some of the German crews were sympathetic. They shoot the fuel tanks out.
Yep.
Let the bomber crews get out. Others would go straight for the bomb bays. In which case there'd be no chance.
No.
But the fact that this has gone straight down, it's
when we can
in
more or less
kind
be
of
sure
combat.
that they haven't shot the bomb load out.
Yeah.
Some of the bomb load was still with the aircraft when it was found in Germany, and had to be defused. So the bomb load that did go up probably went up on impact rather than being part of the shooting down process.
Yeah, that's fuel and oil. That's fuel, that's oil. Oh, and that's white lines.
Just have a little look around the other side.
Yeah, that's oil. So, as I say, the trouble trade is just design.
How many times have we run it, David?
I lose track.
You want to stand this side just so I can get your audio, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, you've run it quite a few times then, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, and then we had to do test runs and things. Make sure everything's working.
Yes.
And also, we've been ironing out sort of small technical bits and pieces as we go along.
I guess you're sort of like wearing her in again, aren't you?
Yeah, first.
Is it the original pistons? And,
Yes, it is.
Is it really?
Yeah. So the first couple of times we run it, we were getting quite a lot of oil and smoke coming back, and when you took the goggles off, you were sort of left with a clear ring where the goggles were, and the rest of your face was splattered with oil. But it's improved a lot as it's kind of like everything's bedding in again now.
Yes, of course.
And the more you run it, the more it kind of beds in.
Yes. It is incredible. You're using almost all the original internals as well.
Yeah.
Just
But the internals
testament
were.
to Rolls-Royce, isn't it? Really.
It is, yeah, and they were quite well preserved because they still had the original oil inside the engine.
Yeah.
So that helps to, keep the corrosion at bay.
Yeah. Well preserved because they were in a bog as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah, I think that's that on the front of the hub. Is that a counterbalance? Is that some kind of a balance?
Yeah.
On the very front of the hub there.
Yeah. We're not really using any of that kind of mechanism at the moment. But it is original to JD 150.
Yes. So we're not sure what's actually inside that.
Well, it has been apart, but I didn't take it apart.
Okay.
So.
But all the feathering mechanisms and so on and so forth are actually inside the hub, aren't
technically, that could still work, but it's currently, as I said before, fixed because the last thing we want is to take a massive bite of air.
Yes.
And sort of the engine's then going to want to fly. Basically, it's going to want to move forward at least.
Of course it will. So I hope that answers your question, Adrian. And what's the normal starting procedure then, Kevin?
Well, just make sure fuel's on. We have to give a little prime of the oil to start with so that we know there's oil in the engine. Once the engine kicks in, its own pump will sort out keeping the oil circulating. Make sure we prime the engine and then a little bit of 1/4 inch of throttle. Then start both magnetos and make sure that after it kicks in that the oil pressure is rising very quickly. And if the oil pressure gauge doesn't start rising, then we have to shut it down.
Oh, really?
There's a problem.
Okay.
Because obviously if you haven't got oil pressure, then you've got a problem with oil circulation, and the
Yes.
engine could potentially seize quite
Yes.
quickly if you
Yes.
continue to run it.
Yes. Is that something that comes up pretty quick? The oil pressure.
Yeah,
You've got an indicator on the panel, haven't you?
We have, yeah.
Okay, let's just have a little look at that. So again, this is something that was created by one of your crew. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is the oil pressure gauge, and as soon as the engine kicks in, we would expect that to start rising very quickly within a few seconds.
Yes.
If it doesn't rise, or if it doesn't get up to, say, 70 in about 10 or 20 seconds, then we would start to be a bit concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what we'll find is that the pressure will rise quite a lot to begin with, and then as the engine warms up, and we've done a bit of 2,000 RPM for a while, and the oil kind of warms up and starts becoming thinner, if you like, then the pressure will start to drop again.
Yeah, obviously.
It won't drop right down, but it will stabilise.
I think we're getting a little bit too much interference with the other guy talking. Is that right, Billy? Or are we all right? Are we all right? Or I just a lot of people talking all at once. No, is it all right? Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that's good then. That's good. Okay.
So the other thing that governs the length of time that we run this engine is the radiator temperature, because generally if it gets up to 100, I will shut it down, because the Merlins were renowned for, on the ground, overheating quite quickly.
Right, because they need forward motion.
Slipstream.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, although we've got a propeller, we've got a kind of reduced, diminished propeller.
Yes.
And we haven't got perhaps
no
quite
cooling.
as efficient system as it would have had in the aircraft. So, for safety of the engine's sake, if you like, when it gets to 100, we'll generally shut it down.
Right.
So it doesn't overheat.
Yeah. But as it is at the moment, it's behaved itself.
Yes, yeah.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible, because I remember when these engines came in here,
Yeah.
and I actually jet washed one of them myself, which was a pleasure to do.
Yeah, but you probably didn't think then that it would end up running.
No, just incredible. Such an impressive engine. And of course, what you could say is that the Merlin won the war, really. I mean, obviously not this variant of it, because there were more variants of it later on. I mean, I don't know whether it was the double X that was used in the Spitfire or...
It was used in the Spitfire, and it was also used in the Lancaster as well.
Yes, of course, yeah. Famously
So,
used
you know,
in,
Rolls-Royce must have
and
been...
Hurricane.
Yeah, that's right. Rolls-Royce must have been under tremendous pressure to get enough engines out to power all these different aircraft types.
Which is why they were made in Canada as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Looks like we might be getting towards the moment of truth, so to speak. Yeah. I believe you've got a one of the vets actually likes to fire it up.
Well, George Dunn, who was a Halifax pilot, we normally get him to press the start buttons. It's kind of poignant because it's kind of what he would have done in the aircraft.
Yeah, of course, yes. Is he Mark II or Mark III pilot?
I think he was actually Mark III.
Okay.
Check with him later. But
Yeah. Even so, still the same start-up procedure.
very,
you know.
very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not exactly the same.
Yeah. So you've got a fuel primer and a button there for the booster coil as well.
Yeah, we don't really use the boost coil so much.
Yeah.
We don't really need to.
You just use the throttle.
We use the fuel primer,
Right.
and then we'll use. Obviously, you've got a mixture control here and the throttle here. But we're not really doing much movement on the throttle because we can't push it to the gate, as it were.
Yeah.
Which it would have been on takeoff power.
And magneto switches as well.
Yep. Exactly the same. Well, all of the instruments on there are kind of original instruments that would have been in the aircraft.
So what you're basically doing is you're simulating sort of like a ground run engine test.
Yeah, that's
up
it.
as
Yeah.
far as you can go.
Yeah, using original instruments. Obviously, they're not out of this Halifax.
Yeah.
They're not even necessarily out of a Halifax,
Yes.
but they are original World War II instruments.
Yes.
Exactly the same as they would have been in the panel of JD 150. But for each radiator and oil pressure and boost gauge, there would have been four of them in a row.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah.
for four engines.
Yes. Yes. And of course, the flight engineer would have had a row of boost gauges, as well as the
The
pilot
flight-
would have seen them as well.
That's right. I mean, the flight engineer would have done a lot of the engine management, well, all of the engine management during the flight, managing fuel. His responsibility was to switch between fuel tanks now and then, so that you're using fuel equally from around the different tanks situated in the aircraft. So you don't want to use it all from one side, and then you'll end up kind of one side heavy. So they try to equalise, and they can also transfer fuel. Say, for example, they had a fuel tank that was punctured by shrapnel or a bullet or something like that.
Yes.
To a certain extent, they could transfer fuel from that tank into one of the other tanks.
Yes.
To try and save as much fuel as possible before it leaked out.
Yes. Yeah. And all that in sometimes in combat situations as well. Which is, you know,
One thing we haven't got to worry about today is any kind of enemy activity, or even if the engine was to quit on us, you know, we're not going down, are we? Just no.
we'll just shut the engine down and carry on with the other
Find out what's happened and fix it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, what time are we planning to
1:30, so very soon.
past? So very soon, yeah. So what I'd like to try and do, if I can, is sort of like stay on this side so I can see your start-up procedure.
Yeah, if you could make sure that it stay well back from the prop.
Yeah.
And just also bear in mind, it shouldn't happen, but if the prop was to pick a stone up, it could chuck it to one side.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's more likely to chuck it against the building there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just beware that it's
Yeah, I'm going to be quite far over there because I can get a good zoom.
Yeah.
Probably going to be somewhere around about here, I'd imagine. Yeah.
And then afterwards, just bear in mind that the exhaust will be
Extremely hot. Yeah. But
Although
she'll be
we've
making a lot
probably-
of ting-tong noises.
She will, yes.
Yeah,
Lots
yeah.
of those kind of noises, and you'll see kind of like heat shimmers coming from it.
Yeah.
But although we're only running it for about 4 minutes, you know, they will get hot.
It's incredible to think that they went out on like 12-hour missions and, you know,
Yeah.
at power as well, you know.
Well, although those exhausts suppressed flame, I believe that under combat conditions they could still potentially get so hot that they glowed in the dark a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it is the ultimate. I don't like to use the word boys' toy, but it is the ultimate. You know, it's like having a historic car, isn't it?
Yeah.
And lovingly restoring that vehicle, and then being able to run it.
Yeah, I mean, being able to sort of experience the sound, the smell,
Yes.
you know, even the bits like you said about the ting-ting from the exhaust when it shuts down.
Yes.
You can just imagine that after a 12-hour mission or whatever, and they finally arrived back at dispersal and shut the engines down, that noise must have been quite welcoming. I
And
think.
eerie because once the last aircraft shuts all its engines down, it's complete silence, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bomber base would be, you know, just noise, just a cacophony of engine noise,
Yeah.
and then nothing.
Yeah.
Just the early morning bird song maybe, because they would arrive back early morning, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
on a lot of the
of course,
race.
all go to a debriefing hut somewhere and have a coffee and a and a debrief
Yes.
before they were
And
allowed to go to bed.
about 20 fags.
Probably,
by the time
yeah.
they even got there.
So I'm not sure if they weren't offered a stiff drink as well.
Yeah. I think they did actually get. They were given a Todd of whiskey in their tea, weren't they?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you could see from a lot of those. So that I've read a lot of books and seen a lot of images, and some of the images of crews that have just returned back off of a mission. It's just they look so tired.
Yeah.
And probably grateful that they've made it back.
Well, they weren't the most comfortable of places to sit for that long.
No.
You know, comfort was quite rudimental, really.
Yeah. Especially for the rear gunner, freezing conditions. I mean, even with a heated suit, just.
Yeah, and I don't know, how you could sit in one position like that for so long.
It was such a cramped, confined space as well. Knowing that, you got a big target written on the back of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or on the front of you, if you're the rear gunner. Okay, it looks like we are ready to rock and roll. Move this mic, Jilly, so I've got a more of a. Okay, I'm going to let the guys get on. Jilly.
And where are they? One of the old boys has just gone to the toilets. So I'll just get me in.
Okay, so what we're waiting for now, folks, is the bomber crews to the bomber boys who are here today. It's just. What's that you just put in there then, Kevin?
This thing. This is an emergency kill switch.
Ah, right, okay.
So if I click that, everything will.
So that's when you see your radiator temperature going too high, or.
Well, I'll try and shut it down the conventional way, but this is under like an.
Okay, so that's that's a complete kill switch. Yeah, I see. I see.
Everything dead
Yes.
for safety reasons.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Put some oil in it.
Is that priming it?
Yeah.
It gets the pressure, obviously, because it's a dry sump. You need to build the pressure up before you fire it, else you knock a big end out or something.
Yes.
Let's take a bit of it.
And all your batteries are in here, I guess.
Two batteries.
Oh, okay.
24 volt.
Here come the gents now. This is our.
Well, hi George. Hello there, how are you? Nice to see you again. Hello George. Yeah. All right. Hello. Yeah. Can't think of life.
Did I wear them before?
You did.
Yeah.
I think you did.
We don't need to put them on until we actually start. So we might get
But it's just a bit loud, that's all.
Yeah. So when we do the reading, is it before?
before, yeah.
Yeah.
So George will do a reading, basically.
They're assembling the George's
A
College.
short, brief history of JD 150 and the crew.
I think he's back.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. That'll be Joe.
It's what's his name? Bell.
Oh, he had a
Somebody said he had a bit of a tumble.
yeah. No, he had a stroke when we were up at Duxford, which involved a bleeding on the brain.
Oh.
And he's had an operation. He's up and about, but last night he had a bad night apparently. It looks as if it might be gout. He rang Cherry at 10 to 8 this morning to say that he'd had a bad night and he got all these shooting pains up his leg from his feet. So of course he's not been able to.
Because I took him home last year because he apparently whoever bought him couldn't pick him up, and he was trying to get a taxi. He said, "Can I get a taxi?" I said, "Look, where do you live?" He said, "Storrington." I said, "Well, I know the RAF place." He said, "Well, that's where I live." I said, "Well, I'm going past there." As it happened, I was going to Worthing that night anyway, so
Anyway, fortunately, we got 2 new people turned up, which was very good. Got 4 there today. Our original group that we had in 2009, which was about 14, we're down to about 3 now. No, not as many as that.
quite a few. Quite a few.
Who's got the paper then, Daniel?
There he is. A bit late in there.
So when we start the when you press the buttons, I'll be ready with the primer in case we need to get
These 2, is it? Yeah.
from there.
Those 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, on the night of July 28, 1943, the crew of Hanley Page Halifax, serial number JD150, took off from RAF Pocklington in Yorkshire to bomb Hamburg in Germany. At approximately 1:01 a.m, the aircraft drifted away slightly from the main bomber stream and was coned in searchlights. Almost immediately, the aircraft was attacked by an Me-110 German night fighter, and JD-150 was set on fire. The young crew battled with their stricken aircraft, finally losing that battle and crashing in the hamlet of Rendsburg in Germany. Tragically, the crew perished. In 2010, the German authorities were working at the crash site to clear unexploded bombs. During their work, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin Mark 22 engines and a number of incendiary bombs and other wreckage was recovered. The engines were offered to the Wings Museum, or they will be scrapped. The Wings Museum liaised with both the Ministry of Defence and the Berlin Embassy to bring these engines back to England. One of those Merlin engines has now been painstakingly restored to run again. The original saxophone-style exhausts give the sound of the mighty Halifax bomber, a sound not heard for 75 years. The names of the crew of JD-150 were as follows. Pilot, Sergeant Gordon Harry Brown, age 19. Navigator, Flying Officer William Joseph John Hitchcock, age 32. Wireless Operator, Sergeant James Wesley Rook, age 22. Air Gunner, Sergeant Edward Goff, age not known. Air Gunner, Sergeant William Roy Sinclair, age 22. Flight Engineer, Sergeant John Alfred Tyler, age 25. And Bomb Aimer, Flying Officer Robert William Allison, age 22. We'll remember them.
We will remember them.
All set.
Clear prop.
Okay.
but another clap for George Dunn, please. The afternoon one will run smoother now.
Okay, folks, I'm just going to try and get a couple of words with George. George, absolute honour, sir, to meet with you, and you are live across the world right now. How absolutely fantastic! So, if you could just tell us which squadron did you fly with? Was it Mark III Halifax Squadron?
No, Mark II. I did 2 second pilot trips on 10 Squadron. Every pilot had to do 2 trips with an experienced crew before they were allowed to take their own crew. And I did those at 10 Squadron at Melbourne. And then after my heavy conversion unit on the Halifaxes, I started off with 76 Squadron at Linton-on-Ouse. And then we got, when they formed the Canadian 6 Group, they gave them all the peacetime stations, and we were kicked out to something a little bit down the lower grade in Nissen Huts. That was at Holme on Spalding Moor, still in Yorkshire.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the Halifax bomber itself, obviously a very sturdy aircraft.
Yes, yeah, it was a very good aircraft. Not as powerful as a Lancaster, but even so, it was. And I didn't have any problems with it at all.
She was able to withstand quite a lot of.
Yes, no doubt about that. It didn't get the credit it should have had, the Halifax, but of course there you are. It did a very good job with Bomber Command.
So how many missions did you fly with your squadrons?
With Halifaxes, I flew 30.
And all into enemy territory?
Nearly all. Most of my trips were to the Ruhr. I did 1 trip to Italy, to Milan, and 1 to Berlin in Halifax. And then as a second tour, I went on to Mosquitoes.
So your missions all at night and
all at night, yeah.
And taking off with all of your pals and other colleagues who flew on those missions.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have any instances where you were under attack or had to corkscrew?
No, we were very lucky. We got hit by flak a couple of times, but we didn't have any problems with night fighters. We did get coned once with searchlights, which involved quite a lot of manoeuvring to get out of the cone. But other than that, no, we had quite a good tour. I mean, there were some hairy moments, but we didn't get any serious damage.
Of course, a lot of the time, you being a pilot, I did hear reports that the Halifax was prone to swinging on takeoff. Was that?
No.
Okay.
Well, you only speak from personal. From personal experience, and I didn't have any problem with it.
But it was one of the most dangerous points of a mission, was actually taking off with a full bomb load, a full fuel load.
It certainly was. Until you reach what they called safety speed, anything could happen, which was usually about 120 miles an hour. Once you got to that, then you felt you were okay.
And your crew, we just heard today, JD 150 had a very young crew, a pilot captain who was just 19 years of age.
Yeah.
What was the age of your crew?
Well, my rear gunner was the youngest, he was 19. Bomb aimer and myself were 20. And then we had a gap between the rest of the crew, were sort of 27, 28, 30. So there was a gap between.
But that's incredible, a 20-year-old commanding an aircraft with 27-year-olds.
I know.
But back then it was, I think, a little bit different, that people respected each other, didn't they?
Oh yes, I mean, basically it was teamwork. If you relied on everybody relied on the other chap to do his job properly, and that I think made all the difference to getting through a tour.
Yes, and you flew with the same crew right the way through the whole tour?
Yeah. Occasionally you had a different gunner or navigator, perhaps due sickness or something like that, but basically the same crew the whole time.
And your life on the station itself was I've read stories of hitting the pub every time you got back, seeing if you could get back in time before the pubs close.
Yeah, well, we were lucky because my flight engineer, his wife and his mother ran a pub. So, and he also owned a car, a Morris 8. So we seven of us used to pile in the Morris 8 on nights off and drive over to Horsforth near Leeds to have a session at the pub was called the Old Ball.
Absolutely fantastic. And in those days you'd had a few drinks and you'd drive back.
No, nobody worried in those days. No. I mean, Farrow's the driver. He was pretty good. He was pretty careful.
Yes.
He was the flight engineer.
Right, so he was a sensible one.
Yeah.
And of course, the crew themselves, especially the navigator, such a lot of pressure on his shoulders to get you to the target in the dark.
Absolutely. I mean, we did have what they called a G box, which was a radar assisted aid, and that of course made all the difference. But of course you did get that would only operate to about 5 degrees east, so then of course it was dead reckoning navigation. I had a very good navigator, excellent.
Which was, a good thing for because I did hear a lot of stories of navigators who would get their crew lost and would sometimes make it back, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So your last mission, where was your last mission? Do you remember?
My last mission was to a place called Cassel, which was near the Ruhr, and that was we were hoping that we would get a fairly what you might call an easy trip, but it wasn't. In actual fact, we lost over 46 aircraft on my last mission. We lost four aircraft from our squadron. So
when you got back, it was a sigh of relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what did you do after you completed your 30 ops?
Went back to an OTU instructing on Wellingtons, and then after about a year on that, volunteered to go back and do a second tour on mosquitoes.
Did you really?
Yeah.
And you
halfway through the tour when the war finished.
So wow, you flew the Mosquito.
Yeah.
With your it was a navigator who's just sat right next to you, wasn't it?
That's right.
Very
just the two of us. Oh yes, there wasn't very much room. Yeah.
And a very was that low bombing missions or
no? Well over 20,000, 26,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So not much of a bomb load on the Mosquito.
400-500s. Yeah.
So precision bombing.
Yeah, it was to keep I was doing Berlin mostly, and it was just to keep the Berliners on their toes, and of course it occupied people that otherwise might have been fighting on the fronts or something like that.
Yes. Well, George, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for your kind words and for your dedication and commitment.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming. And what was it like just firing up this engine again?
Oh, because I've done it before when I first did it. It's great to hear that noise of the old Merlin. Yeah, you never forget that.
Never forget that. And of course, you were the man who pressed those buttons at the beginning of every mission to start those engines.
Yeah.
And of course, your ground crew were important too.
Oh, absolutely. We had a marvellous ground crew. They were very, very thorough in their work, and they looked after their crews.
And they looked after their aircraft like it was their own.
Yes, yeah. If you brought an aircraft back with a hole in it, you were in trouble.
George, thank you so much.
Okay, pleasure.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you. Okay, so here's your Lancaster bomber. We'll be coming to that in a short while. Before we come round to the Lanc, let's just have a little walk around the bomber hall. B-24 Liberator, right there. She's a beauty. The Harvard, which was, I believe, one of the training aircraft mainly used. Oh, it's the Oxford, my apologies. Of course, the Blenheim, which was developed into a night fighter, short bomber, short-range bomber, Bristol Blenheim. Of course, they've got a. How's the audio, Gilly? Is it not too? It's not too in your face, so to speak, is it? Yeah, we got it. Okay, so they developed that into a night fighter later on in the war. A couple of big air-cooled engines. Bristol Mercuries. Obviously, some developers, aircraft manufacturers, favouring the air-cooled or water-cooled engines. So what we'll do is we'll move around here. Look at that. Decent sized bomb bay. Not too easy to see inside the aircraft. Bomb aimer's sight right there. If we can get a good close-up of that, or not really. Entered the war really early, around about 19... Actually, when I say entered the war, actually entered service in around about 1937. So one of the very early developed bombers, only twin-engine bombers at this time, and then of course the Air Ministry calling on designers to develop long-range bombers in the need for possibly increasing their range at a later date. So let's just, as we walk around here, they've moved, Hendon have moved a lot of their aircraft into this hall, and impressively, and one of these things that, if you look at, just have a look at scale here, look at the size of that Stuka dive bomber over there. These are all, these are not replicas, folks, these are actual aircraft. Heinkel HE-111, that was the only real heavy bomber that the Germans had, of course. Twin-engined only. And these engines on the Heinkel, I seem to remember, are actually, as with a lot of the German aircraft, were actually upside down. They were inverted engines. See the air intakes? So Stuka, with its classic wing profile. And that noise that that they used to have when they were diving was actually apparently, I don't think it's a myth, but apparently they actually built something in to scare people with. See if we can get a good look in that bomb aimer's position right there. From memory, I think they just had one pilot on board the 111. There's his. You can just about see the stick there, the column. Just the one column. Big chunky wing. Look how deep that wing is. Obviously to store the fuel. Of course, belly. I'd imagine a belly gunner. Whether that was radio controlled or not, I don't know. But radio controlled, obviously very, very early development. Back in '39. Pretty primitive design, but effective. Mostly used, obviously, in the Battle of Britain. So, that's your German long-range bomber. Now, this one here, this is an interesting find, I should say. You can just about see, this is a Halifax bomber. It's a Mark II. You can just about see the TL markings on the side there. That signifies the squadron. This was 35 Squadron. And 35 Squadron was actually led by Leonard Cheshire, who was the was to become the leader of the Pathfinders. And then later on, of course, after unfortunately Guy Gibson losing his life on returning back in his Mosquito, Leonard Cheshire was to take over the Dambuster Squadron 617. Now this aircraft in particular, you can see obviously it is a wreck. This was literally pulled off the lake bed of a Norwegian lake after it was on a raid to the Tirpitz. Obviously, the RAF carried out a number of raids on the Tirpitz to try and, whilst it was in a Norwegian field. No jokes, please. And of course, it landed. The pilot successfully landed it on a lake. It was shot. It was obviously hit by flak. And what is amazing is he managed to land it on the lake, but obviously during the warmer months when the lake, when the ice dispersed, the aircraft sank to the bottom, and there it stayed right up until around about the 70s, I believe, somewhere then, where it was recovered and successfully recovered and brought here to Hendon. Now you can see here, this is the fuel tank area, the outboard fuel tanks, where the flak successfully hit the aircraft and burnt the wing. He obviously managed to bring the aircraft down, land it on the lake, but as you can see, caused a huge amount of damage. The wing obviously burnt off and dislodged itself, and that's the remnants of the wing right there. Let's just have a little look here. This is the kind of damage that you'd see inflicted on aircraft after a raid. These guys obviously very, very lucky indeed to get out. It's a 7-man crew there, fellas. That's probably the ground crew. Each aircraft assigned its own ground crew at the squadron base. You can see this Halifax bomber has successfully made it back to base. Looks like a Mark II there with the D fins on it. So, as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of damage caused by that flak. So as we come around the front end, now they've obviously we've lost the outboard engine, as you can see. Now this engine was actually from this aircraft, taken, the Merlin XX, taken and restored by a restoration group. What's interesting, as you can see here, the Air Ministry and different designers worked on a number of different ways to reduce the amount of flame that came out of the exhausts. And this is one of the way, the trumpet exhaust which was created to minimise the amount of flame that came out, so that the night fighters couldn't see it, as you can see there. A very sort of like minimal amount of exhaust flame coming out of the engine, so that they weren't visible, of course. So beautifully restored, that Merlin XX. And as you can see, because of the exposure of the wings, we'll probably be able to see it better around the other side. But look at the all the engine controls for the carburation, adjustment controls, and obviously you can just about see. No, you can't see it. Unfortunately, I can't. Now, what is a shame, I might have to come back to this, because they do have lighting on this aircraft. So we'll try and see if we can get the lights on in here, because that is a pretty impressive cockpit to look at when the lights are on. Handley Page Victor, as we all know. Handley Page building this Halifax. So you can see the front turret there, bomb aimer's position, right there. That's where the wireless operator would have sat, right in there. You can see how small. Yeah, we'll probably get quite a bad. We're at the worst side of the museum at the moment, Jilly, just for in terms of reception. Okay, so you can see the. This was before the aluminium props were brought into service. Wooden props originally on these Mark II Halifaxes. In fact, all the Halifaxes only having wooden props. These are the engines as they were brought off the lake. You can see a little bit clearer the exhaust. You see, he did a great job bringing this aircraft down. There's actually a crease in the fuselage there as well. Bakelite, that's the that's actually a very early turret up there as well, mid-upper gunner turret. And that's for the wireless. Early aircraft obviously had a line that ran right the way across from that position up to the tailplane. But these slightly later aircraft, this is sort of like between a Mark I and a Mark II. Oh, that's a nice noise. Okay, so that's actually as she was brought off the lake, folks. Really impressive sort of like display of a wreck. And of course, as we all know, the history of the Tirpitz, eventually brought down by Cheshire and his crew with the Tallboy bomb, taking out the Tirpitz. So, moving on. The Liberator. Probably after the B-17, one of the finest and most successful four-engine heavy bombers of the US Air Force. Of course, used by the British as well. And of course, the Americans only doing the daytime raids, whereas the the British doing the night raids. It's one presented by the Indian Air Force to the RAF Museum. How about that? That's pretty impressive. I'd imagine air-cooled radials once again. Not the biggest of the American bombers were never known for their huge bomb carrying capacity. The Liberator having these side bomb stows, which as you can see there, where the side bomb doors would open and the bombs would drop from a vertical position. Side undercarriage folding up into the wing, as opposed to into its own bay underneath the engine nacelle. These are proper cannons up the front here. Americans, I think most of the American armory was cannon rather than the 22. You can see how small the cockpit is there, which is so visibility, I'd imagine, when taxiing was probably quite dodgy. Of course, what's interesting about this aircraft, as you can see, is she has a nose wheel, as opposed to most of the bombers of the era having a rear wheel. So she was a nose wheel steer. Decent enough wingspan. For anyone who likes their tractors, this is the sort of thing that you would see on the airfield, towing the bomb tally out to the aircraft. Lovely old thing, that. I guess there's a lot of people who watch Big Jet TV who say like their tractors. Nice bit of nose art there. Of course, nose art was one of the things that sort of like the squadrons worked on their individual aircraft. This is a very famous one. I'll just show you this quickly. That was a very famous one on a Halifax Friday the 13th. That actually made it through the war as well. And unfortunately, all that remains of that Halifax is literally the bomb tally and her nose art. You can just see there. That's the squadron medals, so to speak, that the pilot would have worn on his tunic. That's actually the window of the radio operator, believe it or not. So here we go then. Right, let's just move around here before we make our way up to the Vulcan. Back to the Halifax. Still got good feed there, Jilly. Okay. See what I'm going to do quick. Let's get it like that. That's it. There we go. Now, here we go. This is an interesting aircraft. Now, this was kind of the scourge of Bomber Command, and when you look at it in scale to the bombers, it's actually a significant aircraft. The BF-110, she's a night fighter, interceptor, and it wasn't until after the war that they actually found out that the reason why so many of the bombers were suddenly blown up without any notice at all, even though later on in the war they had what was called the AGL, which was the automatic gun laying turret on the Lancasters to detect aircraft, night fighters and night interceptors coming at them, so they'd at least get some warning. However, these particular aircraft, the 110, had what was called Schrag music, which is an upward firing cannon, and it's as simple as that. A really unfair way of taking them down, and of course all they do is they creep up underneath the bomb bay of a Lancaster, or creep up underneath a Lancaster. I'm not saying that all ME-110 pilots did it. Some of them were sympathetic to the bomber crews, because obviously they were all heroes in their own right, and some of these night fighter pilots would creep up and make sure that they were under the wing of the bomber and shoot the wing out so that puncture the fuel tanks, and then at least give the crews some chance of escaping and parachuting to safety. if they could. So, you know, some sympathetic night fighter pilots, others were less sympathetic. Of course, as you can see, she's quite a big aircraft, and this is a beautiful example, it has to be said. Like I said, scourge of bomber command, literally. And of course, that very similar model to the Ju-88 bomber with the Luftwaffe back in those days. So, just have a quick switch around here. Now, I know we're talking about bombers, folks, but this particular aircraft here, the Mustang, the P-51, beautiful aircraft and a beautiful example of her here at London Hendon. And of course, later on in the war, Leonard Cheshire actually preferred, this was his preferred aircraft, as using it for pathfinding and actually marking the target for the bomber forces before they came in. So powered by, of course, the Rolls-Royce engine, very famous engine during the war. Now, just quick, let's just move around to this one here, which is again a big favourite amongst people. Just show this. This is a Merlin XX, powering most of the big aircraft back in the day. The Lancaster heavy 4-engine heavy bomber, of course the Halifaxes, and of course the Mustang, the Spitfire, and the Hurricane. And of course this one here as well, the Mosquito. Again, extremely lightweight aircraft, literally built out of wood. Can you believe it? So light, power to weight. It very easily repaired, of course, if they ever came back with damage. Guy Gibson used this aircraft later on in the war, and of course went missing on one of these Mosquitoes later on in the war, which was a great shame. Decent enough bomb load. They would sort of like an in-out bomber, where they would low altitude, high speed bombing runs, get in and get out. The size of these props, folks. Tiny little bomb aimers position right down there. Of course, two-man crew on the Mosquito, and the flight flight engineer would also pair as the bomb aimer as well. As you can see, I don't know if you can see through there, but it's extremely tight in there to be able to squeeze down into the bomb aiming position, lie down and release your bombs. Of course, some of them did it without the bomb aimer, and as we've seen in some of the movies, would literally use a bomb teat inside the captain's compartment. Such an impressive aircraft, and of course a great example of this aircraft right here at Hendon. Lovely little car, which a lot of flight crews used to buy whilst they were on station. Very cheap money, of course. Try and cram like seven of them all into one car and head down to the local pub, and of course drive back completely blitzed. Back in the day when the local cops would just be like, "Go on in, Sonny, just get on your way there, Sonny, make sure you're up in the morning," because literally every day was a miracle for these guys who flew in these aircraft, folks. Literally a miracle, making it through. They had most of the bomber crews had to go through 30 operations, 30 night operations before being retired out of the Air Force. But then it would a lot of them would return. We're coming back to this beautiful Lancaster in a short while. Let's just move round. Okay, here we go. Again, the Mosquito. Sorry, the Mustang. Huge, great air intake underneath her belly. Beautiful example, beautifully polished. And right behind her, as you can see, this is the Americans' 4-engine heavy, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Why did they call her the Flying Fortress? Nicknamed her the Flying Fortress, so to speak, because she was literally, she had an armoury unlike any other aircraft. 2 waist gunners either side at the back, 10-man crew, 2 waist gunners. This one here would be operated, this gun turret here would be operated up front by this chap. There's a bomb aimer's position right there. Norton bomb sight. Again, not the biggest and heaviest load of bombs on board the aircraft, but they preferred to do things more in numbers than single aircraft. So they would fly in huge formations, mainly from Norfolk, the airfields in Norfolk, because it was so flat out there. Of course, our boys stationed in airfields up in Lincolnshire, but these boys would fly out of Norfolk, and some down actually in the New Forest, a couple of stations down in the New Forest, but predominantly she was these aircraft, just walking up here, excuse me, predominantly these aircraft were stationed out in Norfolk. Big set of all air-cooled radials on her as well. So you've got a mid-upper turret. I say mid-upper turret, an upper turret. There's your waist gunner position out the back there. And of course a tail gunner as well. Later on, the tail gunner would become a radio-controlled or automated gun turret. These things, if you read the books and look at the pictures, these things would come back very resilient, half the tail missing, shot up, hundreds of holes from cannon fire. Such an impressive aircraft, and of course many of them still surviving, America taking them back, and there are a lot of them still sitting out there in the desert, and a lot of them still being restored and flown, and you can fly these in America, fly on board these in America. There's quite a few historians who've restored them and of course brought them back to life as they were back in the day. And of course we do see one of these flying in the air displays in the UK. And that's the Memphis Belle, of course, the very famous Memphis Belle. And that one, the Memphis Belle, was painted, whereas this one would have been just in her bare metal. You see these panels here at the side, it's just quite interesting to see, and I'll show you on the Lancaster in a little while, that these panels, some of these panels are literally patches that they used to rivet. So sometimes when you can see on these aircraft, you see little patches where it's sort of like, are they supposed to be there? Well, they were sometimes literally created and patched over. So whether these are patches, I'm not sure. We'll just have a little check round the other side and see whether it's the same on the other side. This is the kind of thing that the geeks amongst us like to look at. So let's see if she's got patches on the other side. She does, so therefore they are not patches, they were during manufacture. So, even so, impressive to see. Very tight compartments, and of course, the most unfortunate thing with these aircraft when they were shot at, and if they went out of control, was the G-forces inside the aircraft. Very difficult for the crews to get out and bail out. Of course, it was always the pilot who would be last or tried to be last to leave his ship, but it was the ball gunner who sometimes was there you go, the ball gunner right there. Now these poor guys, if the hydraulics ever got shot out and because the only way into the ball turret was through the inside of the aircraft. Sometimes these guys would get trapped in the ball turret, and of course the rest is history really. I don't want to go into detail, but these poor guys, heroes every single one of them, wouldn't make it when the aircraft obviously either panned. If they panned with no hydraulics, so no undercarriage, they'd have to come down and belly land it. Just a little look over there. Okay, we got glitching or... Okay. Okay, so we have, if I, just keep me posted, Jilly. Okay, so the FW190, the Focke-Wulf 190, another, they used to have, they did have a long-nosed Dora, as they were called, later on in the war. And the FW190, again, an amazing fighter, which was again the scourge of the Americans and the British as well. And of course, these guys, the Americans, you know, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to go in the daylight in huge formations with fighter escort? Of course, the fighter escort would be the those particular mosquitoes, and yeah, I mean, during the daylight you can see what's going on. You can see your mates getting shot down. At night, you know, you just see explosions, whether they're decoys or what, you don't know. But it's a bit of a difficult one, tossing up whether you're going to go daylight or nighttime. Okay, Julie, I'm just making my way around here to the B-25 Mitchell bomber, folks. This is the. Is it okay? So sorry about any glitching, folks, but we're right round the other side of the museum. So, okay, B-25 Mitchell bomber, another set of radials, and of course nose steering on this aircraft, medium range bomber with the American Air Force, and of course used by the British as well later on in the war. This is the sort of bomb that you could expect it to be carrying. 2,000-pound high capacity bomb. Not the biggest of bomb bays, as you can see there, folks. Okay, now what I'm going to try and do here is make my way around. I just won't walk too fast, GP. Waist gunners on the Mitchell. And again, another rear turret, rear gunner who would sit up in there and use the guns almost with a yoke, almost like flying an aircraft. So have gun sights and everything there. Let's just have another little look round at the B-17, the Flying Fortress. This is a G, I believe. This is a G model. Little crew door there, which we've. I don't know if how many of you guys have read many of the books on Bomber Command and the bomber forces during the war, but some fascinating stuff, and really gives you a perspective on how brave these guys were. Nice little bit of. Some of the what is amazing when you look at some of the materials that they used early on in the war. Bakelite, of course, was heavily used at this stage, but some of these titanium, early forms of titanium, but heat-resistant materials was what they were, obviously, what was most crucial. As you can see, what's interesting here is you don't have any exhaust outlets. There are your exhausts going right the way down to the outlets down there. So again, reducing the visibility of the aircraft in terms of night fighters, but of course these aircraft not flying at night, only flying during the day. Carb air intakes, of course, I think. You still got good? You're still good? Okay, folks, well, here we are, look at this. Okay, so now this particular Lancaster bomber served with 467 Squadron and later with 83 Squadron. She's actually got the 83 Squadron PO on her at the moment, and this particular model and particular aircraft was the first ever to carry out 100 nighttime missions. And as we've seen with the other aircraft, the other bombers, like the B-24 and even the Halifax. The Halifax had a decent bomb bay, but the B-17 had a very small bomb load. That's why they needed to fly them in such huge formations. But you can quite clearly see here how big the bomb bay is and how significant she was as an aircraft. And later on, when she was serving with 83 Squadron, this was put on the side of the aircraft. This is your pretty standard bomb tally. Look at that for a bomb tally. There's your 100 missions, DFCs and bars and so on and so forth. Again, on the tunics of the flight crew, of the captain, the skipper, as he was known. No enemy plane will fly over the Reich territory. That's what Hermann Goering actually said, the leader of the Luftwaffe at the time. And of course, we soon proved that wrong. Interestingly enough, you see those little alloy they're actually wire cutters for balloons, for if they fly through balloon. So that's always quite interesting. Of course, once again, tiny little cockpit. Bolton and Paul, I believe, front turret. Bomb aimer's position up the front. Now, don't forget, folks, that the plan is that we'll be going on board these aircraft in future shows with our elite members and bringing you some quite significant and interesting tours on board. Of course, powered by the Merlin XX. I would say the most successful engine in history in terms of prop-driven aircraft. Probably one of the most successful and one of the most preferred by aircraft designers. And what's interesting about this as well is that this undercarriage, and quite a few of you historians might know that these particular tyres, they didn't actually have treaded tyres back in the war. These would have been put on later on with tread on them. But this undercarriage is actually manufactured, I believe, by Doughty, and Doughty are still extremely active in the aviation industry. And I think you'll even see them on some of the most modern aircraft that we've got out there, which is really impressive to see. And of course, Doughty also doing the electrics. Now, this is another. Is it Doughty? Now I'm questioning myself. Okay, I'll have to come back on that one. But what's interesting is you can see the way they've covered the exhaust outlets on these earlier aircraft. The early versions of these were actually made of material. These are steel. You can just about see. You can just about see the stub, the exhaust stub behind there. Now that was that's obviously to stop the engine, the flame from the exhaust being seen by the enemy night fighters. And of course, the names on the front of these engines and on the carburetor, on the oil cooler intakes, I believe, are of course the Flying Officer McManus DFC, Distinguished Flying Cross, Pilot Officer Tottenham DFC. So a lot of these guys receiving the DFC either during or after the war. So you can see flaps. This is flap down position here. That's where the huge, great big housing bay for the undercarriage at the back. What's interesting as we come back here is the that bulge there underneath the aircraft. That's the H2S dome, which is a very early form of radar, ground radar, which the navigators obviously used for pinpointing any positions. Mid-upper gunner with a okay, interesting. So you can just about see this is a cookie, what they called a cookie. Huge, great bombs that they drop. And of course, this aircraft being famous for the dams raids, they were heavily modified. Literally took out the bomb bay doors and panelled it and reduced the weight. Took out the mid-upper gunner. I think they even took the rear gunner position out, just to, because these turrets actually weighed a ton, well, more than a ton, but weighed a lot. That entire assembly would probably reach all the way down to the bottom of the S. The whole assembly of it, obviously, it moved in a on its own axis. Huge, great big rudders. That's the max out. That's to stop the rudder from overcompensating. Inspection panels, trim rudder, and that's just obviously the overcompensate there as well. Bolton and Paul Mark II with the 2.2s. Later on in the war, these the Lancs would be fitted out with the cannon, 50 caliber cannon. You can see how small that tiny little position is there. One of the loneliest positions on a bomber, apparently, the rear gunner. The amount of times that the communications would go down and he'd be on his own with no comms with the guys up front. They're the chutes for the cartridges, for the empty cartridges. And of course, I might be getting some of my facts wrong, folks, so I do apologise for that. And I always love to hear me being corrected. Again, these are the trims, the elevators, max out trims tabs. Just have another good look at her. Such an impressive aircraft. I mean, she's up, fair enough, she's up on her rear wheels being jacked up, so you don't get the sort of like angle, the true angle of her when she's sitting on the ground. But I think that's good enough. I think we've got enough there, of course. Hope you enjoyed it, and of course don't forget Hendon Museum, the Royal Air Force Museum at London is where you want to go into your browser to check any information. It's free to enter. There is no charge. Of course, there is a parking lot here. You do have to pay, but it's very reasonable. And I just have to say, they've got great markings. The way they've redone the parking lot here, the parking lot markings are very much like taxiways. And someone with a lot of forethought has gone into doing that, which is quite good fun for the kids like me. Back up you go. I'm live, sorry. Am I live? Okay. Okay. Hey folks, well there you go. Lots of good stuff there, and of course we decided to sort of like hang back from the PIP stuff today with the modern stuff on the departures and flyovers, just out of respect for the guys, the veterans, you know, just to keep it nice and clean on the feed. But yeah, of course, more stuff coming up this afternoon or early evening, 6 o'clock tonight, local time. We will be back with, I'm trying to put some stuff together here on an edit from Biggin Hill, if you remember way back when. Unfortunately on the day, the problem that we had, because we were using quite, I wouldn't like to say archaic, but it was quite old equipment, so we had signal issues, of course, when you're in a crowd of 10,000 people and they're all using their phones, they're all using their data, so therefore the signal is obviously sometimes extremely difficult to capture. So I'm going to try and put some stuff together here for you this afternoon. Got some Red Arrows, Lancaster BBMF, Spitfire Hurricane, the B-17 Flying Fortress, along with some other stuff, Hawker Sea, the Sea Fury, Spitfire Hurricane Scramble, as much as stuff as but it's going to be quite a tight edit, I have to say. Whether or not I'm going to be able to do it or not, I don't know, because of the cuts between the signal issues that we had. But anyway, we'll be back later on this afternoon. Hope you enjoyed that. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay well, stay safe. And we'll catch up with you later around about 6 o'clock tonight. Take care, folks. See you later. Bye-bye.